The following is an AZPM original production.
For AZPM, I'm Mark McLemore, and this is Arizona Spotlight. Coming up, this week the world is commemorating the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The loss of life was catastrophic. I'll talk with Professor Minoru Yanagahashi, a retired University of Arizona professor who was 13 years old in 1945. Meet Gloria McMillan, a long-standing member of Tucson's pro-peace and anti-nuclear community. She organized a memorial last Sunday in honor of the bombing's victims. And as a bartender, Joshua Lillie is privy to a lot of things that many Tucsonans would rather not remember. As a poet, he bears witness to all the seasons of human nature. His new collection is Small Talk Symphony. Those stories are next on Arizona Spotlight. It has now been 80 years since the U.S. used 2 atomic bombs on the population of Japan in an effort to bring the conflict of World War II to an end. My first guest lived through those events and the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which had begun the war. Minoru Yanagahashi, now aged 93, is a retired professor of East Asian Studies at the University of Arizona and has been a local resident for 40 years. He was growing up in Honolulu, Hawaii with his family when he became a witness to history. In 2022, he wrote the book, The Japanese-American Experience, Change and Continuity.
The end of the war, actually, for those of us in Hawaii, it was a great relief. However, for many of us, for example, my parents, they came from Otake, Hiroshima Prefecture, which is about a 40-minute train ride from Hiroshima. So they pretty much, had friends in Hiroshima who were affected by the bombing, and so it was for them a very traumatic experience. But for those of us, second generation, we didn't have that kind of emotional attachment to the people in Japan. So we were quite relieved. It would hasten the end of war. As it happens, of course, another bomb fell three days later in Nagasaki. So the war continued. But then in a week's time, the war ended. So, it was with mixed feelings. But for my parents, it was a very traumatic experience.
What can you tell us about your personal experience after the war with anti-Japanese racism?
The experience is quite different, actually, between the mainland Japanese and the Hawaii Japanese. And the reason for this is that we were a large minority. Actually, we were a larger part of the population. At that time, we were 1/3 of Hawaii's population, about 158,000. So, although we were an ethnic minority, we didn't have that kind of feeling of being a minority. And also, we were more concentrated. Most of us were in Honolulu, whereas the mainland Japanese were really scattered throughout California and Washington and Oregon and so forth. So geographical spacing and the fact that we were a very large group in Hawaii made a difference in how we took racial discrimination. Yes, we were discriminated, but, we live in a multicultural environment. We went to school and we lived next to other ethnic groups. So we had this kind of interchange already, and our view was one of getting along. When I first came to the mainland to work here and to go to school, I was shocked at how the mainland Japanese took discrimination. They really had a chip on their shoulder and really felt that they were very low class and so forth. They didn't have the confidence. Whereas in Hawaii, we just took the discrimination and we said, okay, we're just going to go ahead.
What about hearing about the internment camps on the mainland, though?
In Hawaii, since we were a large number, they could not transport us to internment camp. So they ended up taking only 2,000 of the top community leaders, like school teachers, principals, businessmen with ties with Japan, the ones that had close ties with Japan. Actually, it was a great deal of uncertainty, and that's the thing that causes worry. But my father, for example, had a plumbing business. His business, got impacted by the war. He had to make adjustments. And my father was very traditional, although sympathetic and loyal to the United States. He never took American citizenship, even after 1952 when the McCarran Act was enacted. He says it's too late, and he still had a very emotional attachment to Japan. He had some property there. Of course, his family, his relatives were there. He just was giving up too much. So he decided to keep his Japanese citizenship. But that's an emotional decision he had to make.
Did you yourself have birthright citizenship?
Which is a controversy today in the United States. But being born in the territory of Hawaii, we were, of course, with the 14th Amendment that became a U.S. citizen. But, of course, the Issei's were not allowed. And for the second generation, this was, something that they were proud of. And, in fact, it became really a troubling thing during World War II when many Japanese American young men were asked to fight for their country, and they were American citizens, and of course they were allowed to do that, but their parents were in concentration camps, and so this was a very vexing question for many of the young men of that time.
You used a word which I've heard before, but I would like you to give me a definition of Heisei.
Issei is in Japanese the first generation. It's a word that's only applies to Japanese migrants who went abroad to other countries. And so you do not use the word Issei in Japan itself because it would not have any meaning. But it's applied to the first group of immigrants to a foreign country. So that's the first generation.
Professor Men, I'd like to ask you your purpose and the message behind your book, The Japanese American Experience, Change and Continuity.
Okay, lots have been written about Japanese Americans, but I felt that this had to be tied together. What I wanted to do was kind of capture the spirit, have a snapshot of the experience of particularly the Nisei, the second generation. Hopefully, I don't know whether I did a good job or not, but that was the purpose of it. And I wanted to kind of leave a legacy in some sense because our generation is rapidly disappearing. I mean, I'm 93, and most of the Niseis are in their 90s, late 80s or 90s. So we'll soon be gone from the scene. And I wanted just to put down on record some of the things that happened, challenges and, disappointments and successes and failures as well. Yeah, the atomic bombing, of course, is controversial today, and there are many people that criticize Truman's decision, but we have to take it in the context of that time. In my studies, of what would have happened if the decision was made not to use the bomb, the Americans would have gone on with the invasion of Japan. They had already planned this out. It would have involved tremendous amount of casualty because when I read the Japanese documents, the government actually wanted the citizens to arm themselves even with bamboo stakes. Can you imagine that? Against modern weapons. But they were determined to defend themselves. It would have resulted in tremendous casualties of the Japanese, and also it would have inflicted the American casualties. So in that sense, the bombing saved lives. So it's a matter of, how do you balance these things? And so for criticism can be made on the moral basis and on the legal basis, whether, you right to use nuclear weapons. So it's controversial. And for those of us that lived at that time, felt it was a necessary step. But on reflection, some people say, well, weren't there other means, instead of using nuclear weapons? Yes, we could have just continued the B-29 bombings and so on. I'm sympathetic to that, the decision, but I understand it came at a huge cost. I want other future generations to realize that nuclear weapons really should be forbidden because you not only have the casualties of that moment, but that whole generation is affected because you have increasing rate of leukemia and all of those effects of radiation illness, and it continues for a whole generation. So it really could wipe out a civilization for that matters. And I just want future generations to realize that, to even play with nuclear weapons is a call for the disaster. I strongly agree with the movement in Japan on August 6th. Have a memorial service and reminding future generations to ban the bomb and never to use it again. So I'm very sympathetic to that movement. Yes.
Minoru Yanagahashi is a retired University of Arizona professor and the author of The Japanese-American Experience, Change and Continuity. The actual dates of the atomic bombings on Japan were August 6th and August 9th, 1945. Last Sunday, a memorial was held in Tucson to raise awareness and give visitors of all ages a chance to pay respects to the victims and the survivors. My next guest, Gloria McMillan, was one of the main organizers of the event, and she joins me now to tell us how it came to be.
I've lived in Tucson since 1973. I've been at the university teaching in the English department, and also I am an artist. I have exhibited around town, and a playwright. I'm all over the map. So I'm what I call an artist who does activism rather than an activist, and there's a big difference. And
Okay.
I'm so glad to be here about this particular bit of activism.
Well, what do you want people to know about the memorial that occurred on Sunday? How did that come to be?
Well, we have a group called the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, or WILPF, WILPF US. And Hideko Tamura is a hibakusha, and that means she lived through the atomic bombing. And she's on that listserv and also attends Zoom. So I got to know all about what she's been doing her whole life to try to make people aware that we can have a future, but we have to deal with this problem because she experienced it as very few people have. And then I made it known in my church community at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tucson, and I got support from the minister, Jamili Omar, and the Social Justice Committee to put on an event the closest Sunday to the 80th anniversary of the bombing.
And what can you tell us about the attendance?
I was so busy I couldn't count, but the room was packed. I'd say 90 people at least.
And of all ages, would you say?
All ages. We had an art activity, 2 arts activities, origami and stenciling the Japanese character, kanji character for peace. And that I couldn't get them to leave. The event was over, and they were frenziedly still stenciling.
You sent us a photograph of that,
Oh, yeah.
which we've got on the webpage at azpm.org.
We also, could I put in one more note? This is the important thing that almost got overshadowed. It took me a couple weeks to set this up. The mayors for peace who are hosting in Hiroshima have their own private archive of posters. And Hideko wrote to them, and I wrote to them about the event, and they gave me the passwords. So our posters came direct from the mayors for peace in Hiroshima, and I had them, put on boards. So we had 6 posters and a big blown up of Sadako, the street puppet.
Gloria, where does your personal commitment to this cause come from?
I was on the fence about even telling you. I don't mind.
It's totally up to you.
It's okay, but I don't want to seem like, it's all about me, but it isn't all about me, but it definitely is where it came from. When I was 3, I had very bad burns, 3rd-degree burns, and big keloids. That's what the scars are called. And this was around 1951. And then when I was older, a few years later, mid to the late 50s, they had all these doctors going to Japan for who were called the Hiroshima Maidens. And most of them had many more keloids and more visible than I had. And I felt as a small child looking at those pictures and reading those stories, well, I know what that is, but not to that extent. And what I would never know is what that is to get in an accident or a bombing and have no hospitals to treat you. That I'll never know. But because of that connection, it isn't like a cause that's something I just took up. I always recognize that, they had that.
I didn't know that, so thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. I just think if you have a sense of scale, if we can show people, like through those Eames, there was one, The Power of 10, that shows scales. It was made in the 60s, very popular educational film, The Power of 10.
Okay.
So people can understand scale. Well, this and the environment, everybody will be gone. All genders, all races, gone. And yet people see it as something so far off that doesn't affect them. There was a very one-sided look at what happened in Hiroshima then, and I think almost most people would say that, maybe justifiably some would say. They knew people suffered, but that wasn't emphasized. So it was a mixed message from the get-go coming out about what happened there.
We still see in our world innocent civilian populations being punished for the actions of their government. We don't acknowledge it in our popular culture that this is still a form of retribution, a political retribution for nations and entities to strike back at the innocent.
It's so part of how the dissemination of information is done. In any given place, your own narrative of your own people gets full press, and occasional blips of the other side may get out, but not often and far separated in time. So people think they're getting a coherent narrative, and that makes it seem logical and inevitable, whatever is happening. That's how I think that you can live with these things.
How people live with
how
these
people,
things.
not you personally,
Yeah.
how people live with this fact that way off somewhere I heard a very brief report that some children got done in by something, but it's obviously justified, And I'm not saying that on our side. I'm not saying that on any other side. I'm just saying this is a process within rhetoric of how dissemination of information works. The nearby and favored gets the better coverage across the spectrum.
There's a famous piece of footage of John Lennon in the office of a journalist. I'm sorry, I don't know her name, but I think she worked for the New York Times. And she said to John, "How would you like to be remembered?" Very quickly, he said, "The Great Peacenik." And she said, "Even more than your music?" She's like, "You silly boy."
Mm-hmm.
And that speaks to me so much.
Well, to me as well, because he's one of the ones that had that vision about what if all the people, could get over some of the baggage that we carry around and shouldn't have to. And I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with what he said. I think that's a wonderful way to be remembered.
Tucson has a strong connection to the peace movement and the folk movement, which went right along with it. And one of our local luminaries, Ted Warmbrand, who has never once taken the silent route when he had something to say or something to sing about a problem or an injustice. He was one of the participants in the memorial.
He was. First of all, I've known Ted for decades, and he's a stalwart trooper going around and just doing community things about justice issues, labor, immigration, nuclear war, injustices, and what should be gotten out that isn't getting out. And so we were so thrilled on short notice that he came. And everybody in the kitchen crew, who I also want to thank, knew him, and they were all happy. He also is well known and works together with Jack and Felice Cohen-Joppa often, the nuke resistors, and I think he's appeared at some of their demonstrations and happenings. But for us, he gave a lot of his Hiroshima songs, and one of them he said he actually taught to Pete Seeger. Evidently he composed it, and Pete Seeger learned it and went around singing it. Ted is going to be doing a free community sing Sunday, August 17th from 2:30 to 4 p.m. at the Pima Friends Meeting Room at 931 North 5th Avenue.
My guest was Gloria McMillan. In addition to her anti-nuclear activism, for 20 years McMillan has worked to overcome the lack of communication between science and the humanities using science fiction. She's the co-founder and co-artistic director of Planet Zoom Players. We have a link to some of their audio dramas on the Spotlight page at azpm.org. And now a conversation with Joshua Lillie, a Tucson native and poet who previously self-published some highly detailed chapbooks. His first officially published collection is coming out next month, and it's called Small Talk Symphony.
It's coming out officially September 15th. That's when the books ship.
When I heard the title, I thought, I hate small talk. But then when I read the poem, I realized that's not really what it's about at all. But working as a bartender in Tucson, I bet you overhear a lot of small talk.
I'm really glad you noticed that connection. That's where the title came from, was bartending and hearing so much small talk. And it's a symphony of small talk.
But it's not in tune.
No, not at all. No, it's a cacophony. I mean, I understand the need to fill awkward pauses and to just have something other than silence. I think I'm just in my head a lot. Like often I bartend alone, and so I overhear all the small talk, but I've learned to not always interject. Sometimes I might have an idea that's worth bringing up to a customer or making myself part of it, but often I just kind of overhear, and I've developed pretty good selective hearing. Often, like when I do hear something that I think, oh, that's an interesting conversation, I'll pay attention. And honestly, a lot of my poems are inspired in that process of overhearing and observing what people are doing in the bar. It's an interesting environment for a creative mind, I guess.
And if someone's at the bar and they're not too far in their cups and they want to engage you in some small talk, what might your reaction be?
Pretty standard. I don't know. I try to be polite, but I think bartending for so long has affected the way that I interact with all kinds of people, because it's a benefit while bartending where someone's talking to me about something and the conversation takes a turn that I'm not interested in. I can say, oh, well, I got to go serve this customer down here. And I can just walk away. You don't have the benefit of doing that in everyday conversation.
I find so much of what other people choose to talk about boring, so boring.
Yeah.
Talking about life insurance or where their cousin went to college, and I don't care about any of that stuff. And then I think about what do I care about, and it's a pretty short list.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. Sometimes I think in Tucson, the nightlife is so different from our day life because for survival, everyone stays sequestered during the day in the coolest place they can find.
Yeah.
But then at night, the freaks come out.
Yeah.
And people are thrown together in combinations that we don't typically see during the day.
Well, I mean, I only work the day shifts now as a bartender. I used to work the nights, and around 2020, it got a little too chaotic for me, so I stopped working the nights. I don't know, I guess maybe a connection there would be like around the time I stopped working nights, I generally just wanted less chaos in my life. Being a bartender, kind of facilitating that chaos or trying to keep it controlled, it really became difficult. It made my anxiety a lot worse. My wife and I built a house almost 3 years ago on the northwest side, tucked into the desert, just far enough away from the city, but not so far. It's a 20-minute drive from where I work on 4th Avenue. So both changing my work schedule and building that house and moving out into the desert really opened up a lot of space in my mind to allow me to write the way that I've been writing for the past few years and for this book to exist.
One thing I noticed in several of the poems in the book is talking about dogs. But in your bio, doesn't it say that you are a cat owner?
Correct. My dog passed away a couple of years ago. He was a big part of my life.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. I tend to stay up pretty late, and when my wife goes to sleep, it would be just me and the dog. So I always had a lot of quality time with him. Mm-hmm. I'd forgotten that the dog came up so often in the book.
It does a bit, and I liked the cross-species compassion.
Downslope. The rain scares all the animals away. I want to see the animals dripping wet, taking turns treating the downslope as a slip and slide, sunscreen dolloped on the tips of their noses. But the animals retreat at even the fewest of sprinkles, never connecting the drops to the heavy gray clouds. The animals never know how much is coming next. I love the rain, but I have a roof over my head and an app that tells me when it will end. I know we're not going to get much more than this.
Was there a key moment for you when you decided that poetry was something that you wanted to do?
Maybe not poetry specifically, but writing. I decided I wanted to be a writer the first time I read a book that I chose in high school. Maybe even the first chapter. I remember reading it and I couldn't put it down, and I just decided I can do this. This is something, it had never occurred to me before. I actually read a book that wasn't assigned to me, a book that I wanted to read. But poetry, I was probably about 18 when I decided to get serious about it.
Do you remember, or do you care to share what that first book was?
The first book was Chuck Palahniuk's Haunted, so kind of a horror book.
That's a pretty big pizza.
Yeah. I mean, the book itself is kind of a bunch of short chapters that are all interconnected, and it was easy for me to read at the time. I just liked his everyman voice. I liked how he wrote really intensely, but in a way that wasn't intimidating, and in a way that it just made me feel like I can write something like that. I get a few years of experience, I can do that.
As a Tucson native, what can you tell me about how you think this city has changed?
Well, it's hard for me to separate myself as a native from myself as a worker on 4th Avenue. And I think the changes, for me, I view them so incrementally. I see the changes every day that I don't necessarily perceive them. But some friends will come and visit from out of town, and they'll see the changes starkly. They'll see them right away, the high-rise buildings, the student housing, and a lot of the issues downtown that have come up recently over the past decade or so. Yeah, it's hard to notice them when you see them every day, and you learn to block out the things that are changing to get to where you're going, and don't notice them right away. But I mean, as I said, living out where I am, trying to get away from that chaos. I try to stay aware of all of these changes, but I also am happy to live in the little bubble that I created that helps me relax and not be so anxious,
Yeah, that's enviable.
Yeah, I wish everybody could have that.
Well, I'd like to ask you to read now. And one that might be key to you also is You Build a House.
Sure, that's the first poem in the book. You build a house. You build a house, and eventually you won't need the tools anymore. For years, they take up space in every available drawer. The hammers stay accessible and the shovels stay out, leaned against all the half-painted walls. The pickaxe stays sharp and the wheelbarrow unburdened by cobwebs. The hope is that one day there will be a place for everything and everything in its place. Everything will be affixed in its proper position, and you can return the measuring tape to the toolbox, and the hammers and the screwdrivers and the stud finder too. This is what the analysts tell you, that the horizon is reachable, but it is miles away. Years and years away. One day the tools will be a reflex in your limbs. Your fingertip of sharpened lead will tighten the loose doorknobs on their own. One day you can move mountains of dirt with trial and error alone. You can patch the deep holes with the whole heart of experience. The teachers can only teach you what to forget, who to forgive. You've got to learn to build memories and to build trust in new futures all on your own.
Joshua Lillie's collection of poems, Small Talk Symphony, will be published next month by Finishing Line Press. Thank you for listening to Arizona Spotlight. This show is a production of AZPM. The production engineer is Jim Blackwood. Production assistance by Zoe Giuliano. I'm producer and host Mark McLemore.
AZPM podcasts are made possible in part by donations from listeners like you. Learn more at support.azpm.org. Thank you.